Hello, and welcome to the next tour with
Ian?
Andia. We are here on episode 37, and we're just the two of us
Just the
today.
2 of us, yeah.
It's kind of fun. So, we're going to be talking about salary and benefits tips. And this really came about because y'all know I've got a new job at MOA, the Military Officers Association of America. And one of the things that thank you. One of the things that we do is we talk a lot about salary and benefits negotiation. And I've been thinking about this myself and my own journey and, examples that I've used. I use you as an example a lot of times when we're talking about this. I just went to Mill Money Con, Heart, love that conference.
Excellent.
And I did a class there talking to financial professionals, helping them with clients they're working with that are dealing with this, salary and benefits negotiation. I think what's so interesting is like when you're in the military for umpteen million years, it's not really something you have to deal with,
Yeah.
right?
Your
So it's,
salary's set. Your
yeah,
your benefits are set,
everyone knows
really.
what it is.
Yeah, really the only thing you have to decide is, do you want any supplemental SGLI? Do you wanna change your allocations for TSP or opt out or whatever the case may be?
Mhm.
That's really about it, everything else is pretty
Pretty
much
sad.
set for you, yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about this, MOA works a lot in this space. We do deep dives. Of course, you can go to moa.org and find out more. But we wanted to sort of just touch on this a little bit today about our own personal experiences. So I'm going to take us way, way back to about 15 years ago when I first came on board to my previous organization. And it was really, I was going from a very set, nonprofit organization that had been around for a really, really long time to a really small organization that had also been around for a long time. But I was coming in as the third employee on staff. And so I didn't really have a lot of people to talk to and say, what should I be making at this organization? But I did have somebody that was close to the organization, but on the outside and close to another organization that was similar. And so I went to him and as one of my mentors and chatted with him about, what should I ask for? Because I had already been asked the salary question and I really didn't know how to respond to it. And we'll get more into that at the end of the episode. But I think it was really helpful. And the first thing that came out of his mouth was like, I laughed at it because I was like, oh, I could never ask for that much, which I was undervaluing myself anyway, right out of the gate. But we agreed on a price that was much closer, or a salary that was much closer to that number that he had thrown out. That
Yeah,
I
but
didn't
we're gonna
think.
talk more again about how you thought about that when we get to
Yes.
some of the tips.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And then just coming to MOA too, that was a different experience going to another nonprofit, but leaving that small one, right? And so there were people that I talked to. I had some ideas. I really had thought about more about my knowledge and skills and experience a lot more when I was thinking about that. But um, I also had ideas on what I could negotiate more. And I think that's what leads me to like
Mhm.
you and telling a couple of your stories as well,
Yeah.
because I think they're really important.
Right. When I took the uniform off, after more than 23 years in, trying to get in the landscape of the private sector, which is where I started, talking to the company to figure out, hey, what am I going to do? One, and then trying to figure out and think about, well, how much do I want to make? How much do I need to make? How much should I make? And these are all questions that are very hard to really think about your value proposition. But if you kind of chunk it out, I think one of the things that, really kind of settled for me in that was, and we've had our previous guest, Todd McCaffrey in season one, check it out. He had the shunts: location, vocation, compensation. I know we're here talking specifically salary and benefits, but that still plays a factor. Even if you know where you want to live and what you want to do, the compensation part will come into that. So that was a huge part in thinking about my value proposition, getting into this first position post-military. Fast forward, I left that company, a great company doing wonderful things. I just wanted to do something a little bit different. That's what brought me back to the federal government. So what about pay and salary and benefits and stuff with the federal government? There's negotiation room, believe it or not. So a lot of folks will be like, hey, when I get out and I retire, for example, I want to be a GS 14, but I got to be a step 10. Okay, maybe. But there's other things that you can think about. And we'll get to some of those details when we start talking about these tips and tricks and, some of our 3 takeaways that we want to offer to you. But I think that that's really the core of it is you have to go into it knowing what you can ask for, knowing what you can use as trade space or leverage, and knowing kind of, what do you want out of it from a compensation, piece of it. How much do you have to make? How much do you want to make? And is your military pension, if that's what you're bringing, to the table, going to factor into, what that offset is? Because one of the big questions, when you get to be in advanced state of youth, maybe like me, and several of you perhaps, how hard do you really want to work in that next chapter? Do you really want to go in and put in 50, 60 plus hours a week? That's a big question you got to think
Mhm.
about because a 250 or $300,000 job is going to demand a lot of work and a lot of time. And I know taking the uniform off and having that familial kind of decision, that was a big part. And for us, it became, man, I don't know if I want to work that hard because there's a reason I took the uniform off, right? Anyway, so that's kind of like, the big stories getting to where I'm at today. But how do we get there? How do we talk
Yeah.
about it? So
Yeah.
let's start with you, Andia.
Yeah, so I think one of the important things to know is that we did do a ton of research before you took that position, right? That first one. And
Yep.
I think we knew what we wanted you to make. I may have done some worksheets on this. Surprise, surprise.
Yes.
But we talked a lot about that, and then we really had to pivot, I think, partially because we started thinking about the whole picture also. It wasn't just about compensation. It was more about benefits also. That first job, you were fully working remotely. And to be honest, I don't think you really loved that.
No,
I
that was hard on me.
I mean, I worked from almost exclusively remotely for 10 years. So I don't think that was actually a good fit for you.
Right.
And I think that was part of the reason that job, I mean, a part of the reason that job didn't work out. But I also think that there's so many things over the benefits package that you have to think about. And it's not just benefits, it's not just compensation, but it's really, really that whole picture. And I think that's where people kind of get hung up on a lot. They're always thinking about that bottom
Just
line.
what's the paycheck? What's the
Right,
salary?
right. And even with you, you got a signing bonus for that first position
Yep.
and you had to give it back.
I had to give it back because there was a stipulation with it. I had to spend a full year with the company to vest or really, get out of there, not have to give it back. And I left early. I left within the first year and I had to give it back. And that's okay. But going into my next job, this is kind of that first little tip and trick. You become a federal civilian, you can ask for a recruitment incentive, a signing bonus. They call it a recruitment incentive. The three R's
Mhm.
in federal government parlance: recruitment, retention, and relocation incentives. You can ask for those. Those are things that are negotiable, and there are some limits in how much the federal government can pay you. But it's that good deal that if you want to ask for it, they'll sign off and put that in your, your official personnel file as on a document saying that you've gotten that before. So look into that. And I basically asked for it and I got it when I got into the federal government to offset what I had to pay back. And
Mm.
that was a good factor for me to consider in my total compensation going into the federal government and negotiating where I was at. So, it was other things,
Yeah,
negotiating the salary. So, what are some of
right.
the other things from your perspective when you're looking at the dollar figures on the salary?
Yeah. So
Where's the trade space that you might be willing to be like, hey, I might be willing to take a little bit of a lower part on the salary if X, Y, or Z.
right. So I think one of the first things is, and I guess we'll kind of jump a little bit to the
Mm.
tips here, but because I'm going to say this word 1,000 times, but research, research, research. And I think why that's so important is because if you're trying to pull things out of thin air, that's not really going to help anyone, right? It's not going to help you as the person, being hired, but it's not going to help the company either because you've got to make sure you're all in the same ballpark. And a lot of positions that are posted out there can have this bell curve of like, I mean, I've seen ones that are 115,000 to 185,000. Well, where do you fit in that, right? I mean, obviously you can see the midpoint, but that can't be the only thing you're thinking about, right? Because you've got to also be thinking about like 401k match, vacation
Yep.
time, location you already mentioned, but like do you want a 2-hour commute? Like
Right.
depending on where you live, do you want a flexible schedule? What are some other things maybe that we talked about?
Yeah. So let's talk about vacation time for a second,
Yeah.
because some places they'll offer you paid time off
Mm.
and it's a bucket, whether it's in vacation time or sick time. Other provisions, of course, for maternity or paternity leave, parental leave, generally speaking, bereavement leave. There's different categories. It's important to ask those questions though. What's covered under the general PTO bucket or paid time off bucket versus specific meds? Some companies will have paid sick time or a sick time allocation. that you don't pay into. It's an allocation that you earn, right out of the chute. And some places will give you that right up front, so you have the ability to, take care of yourself if something were to happen right on the front end.
Right.
And then the amount of vacation time you earn, it can accrue at different rates.
Yep.
Not all places will give everybody the same number of days off. In uniform, we earn 2.5 days a month, 30 days a year, straight out of the chute. Everybody earns the same. As a federal civilian, for example, depending on if it's your first job, your grade, your previous history, all those different things, it's either 4 hours, 6 hours, or 8 hours per pay period, which is every 2 weeks. So you can ask and negotiate that based off of your qualifications and your history. And again, depending on, we'll go back to the GS system. If you're negotiating a step, maybe the trade spaces, if they don't want to give you a step 10 or a step 8 or whatever, ask for 6 or 8 hours of annual leave accrual per pay period versus, the 4 as a
Mhm.
brand new civilian. Those are things that can happen.
It's a great negotiating tool, and that is something that I did when I came to MOA because we were not quite at the salary I wanted to be at, and so that was one of the negotiating tools because I ended up getting more vacation than the standard for coming into the organization, and that to me had much more value,
Mhm.
right, than me trying to negotiate to the dollar amount that I was trying to get to
Yeah.
because I also was interested in the culture of the organization, the mission, the people, the fact of I had a hybrid or have a hybrid schedule. Like those other things
Yep.
were really important to me. And when we say it's not just about compensation, that's what we mean. Like it's also about the organization and it's about the other benefits too. We
Education,
yeah, education
tuition
benefits.
assistance, or
That's
or certificates that you get paid for.
yeah,
Training.
Mackenzie has that at Boeing, and that was a really big pull for her. And looking over at her different compensation package, and I think what's really interesting too is that there's a lot that's negotiable that
Okay.
people might not necessarily think about.
So let's
So,
let's look at the back end thing. So
yeah,
retirees. I come with TRICARE, right? I also come with my VA benefit as a disabled veteran. So there are things where, do I want to pay twice for insurance? Probably not. So, that's something
right.
that we talked about both with your position and mine.
Yeah, absolutely. And your civilian position though it might behoove you to do vision and dental because it's separate from TRICARE, right? When you're a
Yep.
retiree, and so maybe you want your employer to pay for that because maybe that is, your copays are a lot less. There's
Or the
possibility,
coverage is better,
or the coverage is
or
better.
or the provider network is greater.
That's right.
Yeah. So all
So
of those things where I think it gets back after that first word you said, right?
yeah,
Research.
research.
Yeah.
Yeah, research. So important. And I think there's a lot of I've worked in the nonprofit space for 15 years, right? So I've worked for three different nonprofit, which is funny because they were all different: a 501(c)(3), a 501(c)(6), and a 501 C19.
I have no idea what any of those are. They all sound
Only
cool.
only the IRS cares, but it is funny because of the different associations I work for. Okay, so but what's interesting is that you can go on a website called Candid, and we'll put this in the show notes,
Yep.
but they're required to file a 990. And so you can actually go in and look at their 990. You can see the health of the organization and you can also see what about the top 5 to 10 people in the organization make. So even if you're not looking at one of those top positions, it'll give you some idea of what their structure looks like at
Yeah.
least, right? And so I think that's a really great tool also. You should be talking to people that work in the organization if you're able, if it's a large organization, but you've got to be thinking about the location. You have to be thinking about the job market at the time. That federal government's lost over 330,000 federal jobs since 2024. Those jobs just don't exist anymore. So that market has shifted and it just looks different now. And so these are things you've got to think about when you're
Yeah.
out and you're looking for a job or when you're in your, transition space. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So you mentioned the 990. I want to pull the thread on something related, but not necessarily to that. When you start talking about being able to see kind of generally who makes what based off the position in the organization, depending on where you live, that state may or may not require a salary range be posted with a
That's
job.
right. Yeah.
So for Virginia, it's not required,
Yeah.
at least in our locale anyway. So, but you can get out there independent. Again, take a look at where you live. If it's not posted where you live, find a comparable, cost of living area. and comparable jobs in the sector that you're looking at. And that can give you a general idea, particularly in large companies that have similar positions in multiple cities. You can then kind of pull that thread based off of where it's posted. And then you can kind of get a bit of an idea and then talk to people,
Yes.
talk to people in that role. And if you don't know somebody, again, we'll go back to using that network.
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we talk about network all the time, but networking through LinkedIn, there was a job that you applied for and it was kind of a stretch position.
Totally.
And which is great. I think everybody should apply and go through the motions of trying to do a stretch position. But knew no one in the organization. But when you went on LinkedIn, you actually found somebody that you went to high school with that worked for the organization. And so you were able to connect with her. And I mean,
And at
LinkedIn
least
is
I got
amazing.
considered by HR.
You did. Yeah. And I think that you wouldn't have maybe even
Oh, no,
had
not
that
a chance.
step. Right. Right. Well, I mean, it was a stretch, but it was a cool thing to be able to go back and use your network and realize that you knew somebody that was in that organization. And so I think it is so important to do research because when it comes down to it, you do have to make sure you're in the ballpark of what you're comfortable with when you're sitting down and talking to somebody. You don't want to be, and the company doesn't want you to either. You don't want to be coming in the door and they're thinking they're going to offer you 75,000 and you're thinking they're going to offer you 150. Like that's
That's
not
miles apart.
that's
Yeah.
not going to come together.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not going to come together real well, but I think it is great to be able to do that research and talk to folks and at least have some idea of
Yeah.
what you should be making. And I think somebody told me like in Old Town, if you're interested in working in an association, there's like 800 associations just in Old Town.
Oh, geez.
And there's like, I don't know, something like 15 or 20,000 in the DMV area. It's like,
Yeah.
it's some insane number. Statistics are made up most of the time anyway.
Oh,
There's a lot of different opportunities in a lot of different places. And so you've got to think about what you really want, not just salary and benefits, but the whole compensation package. So we
so
didn't, oh yeah, I was just going to say, we didn't really talk about like 401k, 403b, and
IRAs,
ESOP.
ESOP, employee stock option plans. I mean, there's so many different things out there that again, so let's kind of recap a little bit and talk the entire compensation package. And I think that's really how you have to look at it by weighing the individual components of the entire package. Salary is but one piece of it. Your paid time off, any sabbaticals, any education opportunities, any offsets if you don't want to take the insurance of
Hmm.
various kinds. All these different little things, they add up. And oh, by the way, you know, we talked that, perhaps the fit for me on a full remote job wasn't great, but what about a hybrid? Is that something that's negotiable in that company or organization or not? Those have waxed and waned over time, as we know. Coming out of COVID, that was everything. Everything was remote. Some hybrid out there in particular in the federal government in the GovCon space. If you're supporting the government directly, those are by and large starting to disappear. So if that's still important to you, it still exists. But again, you've got to get the research done.
Yeah. And
So
can be negotiated
it
too.
can be
So,
negotiated.
and then there's, when we talk about the financial aspects, there's vesting schedules and those exist for a reason, right? The organization wants to put their time and energy in you, much like a signing bonus,
Yep.
right? That you had a year long. A vesting schedule is usually graduated and gets to fully vested around the 2-year point, depending on the organization. So, again, a retention tool, they want you to stick around and, whatever the company had put in, of course, whatever you put in is yours. But I do think that that's a negotiation tactic as well. There's a lot of things that can be negotiated. So always think about this. And one thing is, if you do not ask for it, you will not get it. So keep that in mind as you're going through this process.
So the one last thing I would offer, if it comes down to a few bucks, there's a few things that I want you to keep in mind. One, is it a role that you see yourself in for the long term? And if it is, there's potential to grow there. Two, don't just take the salary itself as the end all be all, because one thing you need to ask about is there a bonus structure? And if there is, generally, what's the range? It's a fair question to ask. And yes, you can and should ask it. And three, one of the things that I know a lot of folks wonder is, hey, there's this company or this particular line of work that I want to get into. The specific job at the level that I want isn't available. If that company has a really low turnover rate and they tend to promote from within, maybe you start at that lower level to get in because that is a huge green flag in the culture of that organization. And if you plan to be in some place for the long term, that is a great way to ensure that, hey, you're going to go into it a little bit of, hey, I'm willing to take a little bit less to be part of this team. And that says a lot right there.
Mm.
However, if you see a company that's got a ton of turnover, particularly at the middle or the top where you might want to be, for example, take a look at that. Those indicators should flag to you whether or not people are sticking around and why they're not sticking around. So ask those questions of yourself and of the network that you've got out there, because I'll tell you what, I don't want to be in a place where, everybody turns over all the time to try to jump ship somewhere else. That's just not a great
Yeah.
feeling for me. And I would rather take less to work somewhere where I'm valued and I can value them right back just as much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what that brings us to our three tips. Like
Mhm.
if you walked away from this episode and you wanted to remember three things, these are them. One, research, research, research.
Well, that's three things.
No, no,
I
still
know.
just one. Number two is knowing your own worth. So do not undervalue yourself. Know your skills, know your experience, know your knowledge base. Make sure you're coming to the table and you're negotiating strongly from your position of power, which is knowing who you are and what you bring to the table and how you can improve the organization. Be careful not to make that personal. Like, I need a hybrid schedule because I have to take my kids to school. Well, they don't really care about that. I need a hybrid schedule because I've found that I function better in that space. Okay, definitely a good one. So, and then knowing how to answer the salary question. So, it always behooves the candidate to wait as long as possible to talk about a number or to throw the number out there. You don't want to be the first one to do it. So, there are a few different options in this. You can defer and say, I'd like to talk about salary once I know better about the position itself. You can provide a range. Like from my research, I think this position is probably between 150 and 175. And you can say also, I think you may be more flexible on salary than I am. So could you tell me what, like you're
Yeah.
kicking it
What's
back to
that range
them?
that you might have to off?
Yeah, what is the range for a typical position like this in the organization?
And then you can take that and negotiate some of those other things that we talked about, pay time off, signing bonus, or recruitment incentive, whatever, the vernacular is for that particular space, those kinds of things. That's where those particular things come in handy to be able to, you know what? Hey, great. Maybe I'll take a few bucks less. Or maybe they're holding their cards a little bit tight and they can offer you more.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I think this kind of wraps up our episode, but I do want to put in a plug for MOA. Obviously, this is why part of the reason we started talking about this. So if there's other tips and tricks you'd like to learn about this space and others in the transition space, MOA.org is a great organization. I think this is, it's always a great place to go and do a deeper dive into some of these.
And then do your research. So, that's the big thing that I would say that, I'm going to re-hit tip number one, continue to do the research because it all boils back to that. Research through your network, research through these different organizations, research through us, go back and check out some of those other episodes and connect with our other guests because they've been out there and have done all of that as well too. So I think, yeah, the one thing that I would leave you with is go out there, eyes wide open, go out there with a dream and go out there with a couple of different numbers that you're willing to live with, but maybe where you want to be and kind of figure out what that really looks like. So I think with that,
Yeah.
we're going to wrap up today and say thank you so much for joining us. Hit us up, follow us on all the socials and Spotify and anywhere you get podcasts or whatever
Our
the case may
YouTube
be.
channel,
Yep.
our website. So we'll share some stuff in the show notes. And then I guess we'll see you next time on the next tour. The views, opinions, and advice expressed by our guest on the next tour are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, Andia, or any affiliated organizations. While we strive to provide helpful and accurate information, this podcast is for informational purposes only. We encourage listeners to consult with professionals or conduct their own research before making any significant decisions related to military transition or post-service life. The content is intended as guidance and personal perspective, not as official advice.